All right.
Give it,
Okay.
give it 2 more seconds, Joe. It's hasn't told me it's going yet.
It says meeting is now streaming live on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, it just hasn't shown me that on the YouTube side yet. So.
Okay. You tell me when.
Yep, we'll do. Okay, we're good. We're good.
All right. Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry we're starting a little bit late, but adequate notice has been given, and we are going to start, as we always do, even virtually, with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'm going to stand up here, and we're going to look at Sean's flag. All right. Pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America
and
to the republic
for which it stands, one nation,
nation,
under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
for all. All righty, thank you. And I do want to note that Amy Rubin has been excused from this meeting. She has a significant personal issue that she is taking care of this evening, so she won't be joining us. So we are going to start with, well, do we have any public comment, Sean, Chris?
No, we do not have any public comment.
Okay. Okay. Then we're not going to start with public comment. We're going to move to superintendent comments. And actually, before we do that, I just want to say that I know that, Sean, you and the whole team have been working your tail off this summer. And I just want to say that I hear from other superintendents, from administrators, that this is probably one of the most difficult times that they've ever had in their careers. So I just want to say, on behalf of the board and everybody, thank you for everything you're doing, because I know this is really, really difficult stuff. So having said that, we'll have your superintendent comment.
Thank you. And I know the team really appreciates to hear that as well. I will say that when we talk about moving work forward that is this intense as it has been for the last couple months, there's no way to do it without a truly effective team. And I'm just so grateful that I work with such a great team of administrators at central office and our principals, and then the teachers who are who are incredible at what they do and make what our district is. And so I'm very grateful to be a part of such an incredible team. So it's good to see everyone. And I would also say thank you for all the support that I've gotten from the board over the last couple of weeks, just check-ins, and really appreciate just all of your support. Normally during the board meeting, we would have recognizing our own. We recognize students or maybe a staff member. And so what I want to do just quickly is recognize a new member of our team who is joining us. And she joined our team 2 weeks ago, and she's already like getting my life in order. And her name is Sandy Manchella, and she is our new executive assistant to the board and the superintendent. And so I don't know if Sandy, you can turn your video on for just a moment so everyone can see you. I just want to welcome you to the district officially, and we are so grateful for all the work you've already done in the last 2 weeks. And watch out, because she means business. I mean, she is going to get us in order. So welcome, Sandy. So tonight is a working session for the board, and it's a different type of meeting. It's different than a business meeting, and it's an opportunity to work differently. And so it's less formal. There's time for back and forth and discussion without having maybe to go through some same protocols. It's a time for you to engage differently with one another and exchange ideas. And tonight we have the opportunity to discuss and potentially approve our anti-bias, anti-racism board resolution. And this is really exciting for us as a district. And having this resolution exemplifies our district's commitment to this work. And however no matter what the resolution says, the words on the paper are important, but they're not as important as the action steps and the data that are going to be aligned to them. And so when we're thinking about this resolution, we hope that it gives us guidance, but it is really the words on paper are not as important as the action steps that are going to be aligned to our strategic plan that are going to support this work. This summer, we've actually been able to support some of the items that are in this resolution, such as hiring a new director of equity and inclusion, which we will be able to announce later this week. And I just also want to recognize the board members who were the authors of this resolution, Stacy Seawack, Kim Hurst, and Jason Wilson, who really spent a great deal of time looking at this resolution as a way for us to think differently. And it's a different type of resolution. When we first looked at developing a resolution, we had a lot of the whereases and that official resolution. And we really wanted to make sure that it was a commitment that was pragmatic, that what people understood, and it was actually something that was going to be action oriented. So really appreciate the board members who dedicated their time to supporting that. We are going to get to that in a little bit, but another part of this meeting tonight is about your own learning, and it's about our collective learning around board governance. And so we, as a board, as the board and as the superintendent, we have to set the tone of being the leaders of learning. And so it's important for us to demonstrate that we are invested in giving time to our learning, and we are going to be doing some work around board governance tonight. And one of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of years is working on being more dedicated to being a stronger board. And this orientation is just not for our newest board members. This is for all of us. And it's for all of us to continue our learning around board governance and what it means to be highly effective. And so we will be very, very lucky to have Janet Tilley from MSBA with us tonight. And she is going to be leading our learning for us. And it's going to be an opportunity for us to have some collective learning around board governance. And so we welcome Janet tonight as well. So before we get started with our agenda items, I do want to take a few moments to talk about our current reality. And as Joe mentioned, we have been focused on our return to learn over the last couple months. And this past week, we made the difficult decision to return with our remote learning phase of part of our responsive learning plan. And we used the guidance from St. Louis County Health Department and also looking at the number of cases of COVID within the region to make this decision. And we also used our guiding principles about making sure that we were keeping people safe, making sure that we had high quality education for our students using equity lens, and making sure that we were doing everything possible to keep people healthy within our region. So this decision is not just about the first day of school. It is about long-term. We may be in this for the long term in terms of a few years that we may have to be working through this pandemic. And so it's important for us to make sure that we are looking at providing continuity of learning for our students. We want to make sure we're taking care of their social emotional well-being. But we also want to make sure that they are truly understanding what it means to be in a different type of classroom, understanding the routines of a classroom that's set up for social distancing, looking at the procedures within our school. And so we are not only going to take this up this quarter as a time for us to have continuity of learning, but we're also going to invest time in making sure our students are coming in small groups and learning what it means to be in a different type of environment. And this gives us the time to really do that, so that way we can do this for the long term while keeping people safe. Ultimately, that is my biggest responsibility, making sure that we're keeping people safe. And I feel confident about how we've changed our remote learning from the spring and what it's going to look like in the fall. It's going to be way more robust, and it's going to provide more of a synchronous type of learning experience for our students. And we listened to our community because we knew that that was really important to them. Last night, we had a virtual question and answer session with our high school families and students. And it went really, really well. And we have 2 more of those this week, because we know that there's going to be questions out there that people are wanting answered. For example, what's the difference between learning at home versus remote learning? Well, they're basically the same. You're both going to be getting a high quality synchronous experience with a daily schedule, but their learning at home is a commitment for the entire semester. If you're deciding to do the responsive learning and remote learning, that means that you're obligated, you're committed to coming back into our schools at some point during the semester. Most districts in this region are starting remotely, and there are a few that are going to be starting in maybe some type of hybrid or modified model. And I know that sometimes people want to compare to why, you know, other districts that are doing things, but we have to make decisions that we know are in the best interest for us. And I feel very confident about the option that we have decided on, and feel that it's going to be in the best interest of our students and staff. So I want to say thank you to the board for your support over the last couple of weeks. I know that you've probably had lots of community members asking you questions. And I think that what we can do is our common message is that we are doing what we think is best in terms of keeping our students safe, but also we have changed the way we're approaching remote learning, and we feel it's going to be high quality for our students. So any questions about that before we move into our next item?
Anybody have any questions? Okay. All right. Thank you, Sean. So we're going to move to, we only actually have one action item, 4.01, which is the board anti-racism and anti-bias resolution. Before you read that, Gary, I just want to offer my thanks to Jason, Kim, and Stacy too. I think what's interesting is sometimes as a board, we're more efficient and effective if we work in subgroups. And so I just want to say to Jason, Stacy, and Kim, you guys did a great job. So thank you. I think you improved significantly what was there, and have come up with something that's really good. And that's great, right? That I think is can be a very effective strategy for us as a board.
So can I add to that too?
Yeah,
Joe?
please.
I think that as we go into this resolution, it's really important that this board has collective understanding of everything that's in the resolution. So this is, although we want to get this approved so we can move forward, we also want to make sure people have a deep understanding about it and have time to discuss it. And when we're thinking about talking about something as important as anti-racism, anti-bias, it's important that we all recognize, you know, our own personal experiences and maybe some of the things that we have to address in terms of overcoming some of the historical biases and racisms that we see within our community. I think it's also important that we're all acknowledge that we're all in different places as well. And that's why we're committing to all having some type of common learning experience around anti-bias, anti-racism work. And then the other thing too is that we have to respect the differences in our opinions and differences in our experiences. All of us have our own stories, and we're bringing those stories to the table. And so when we have discussion about this, we want to make sure we're respecting one another's experiences, and knowing that those are their experiences, and we have to make sure that we are respecting those. And then the other thing too is that as a district and as a board, it's important that we have trust. And one of the things is that we have enough trust with one another that if we want to challenge one another sometimes on that, is that we burn trust sometimes. And that might mean that we ask really hard questions of one another, but it doesn't compromise our relationships and that foundation that we have. So, and so tonight when you're discussing it, I ask that you share airspace, ask those questions that you think are going to help make sure that we are moving this forward with a collective understanding. And then we feel really confident about the way we're moving this resolution forward. So I just wanted to add that to that.
Great. Thanks, Sean. So Gary, you want to go ahead and read the action item, and then we'll have a discussion.
Absolutely. I move that the Board of Education approve the anti-bias, anti-racism board resolution to recognize the injustices against Black Americans and to commit to our district's work on equitable and anti-racist systems.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thanks. It's been moved and seconded. And I guess just, I do want to honor before I open it up, again, Jason or Kim or Stacy, since you guys were the creators along with Sean Do any of you want to speak first or give any context before we open up to questions?
Okay, I can start.
Go ahead.
I guess I just reiterate what Sean said, that our goal here was to make these not just commitments, but actionable action items, and also in ways that will be easily measured and easily understood by all. And I also want to say I feel like we were really careful about the language and kind of discussed, different phrases and different words that we thought were most appropriate. And we did have discussions around that. We tried to, I'd say, avoid redundancies and keep this, to a one pager so that it's not too cumbersome for the public or for any of us, to digest. But certainly, we're presenting it to you all too for feedback.
Thank you. Jason or Kim, you want to add anything to it in terms of context for it, again, since you guys created it? No, yes?
I guess I would also add that other than myself, Jason, Kim, and Sean's team has looked at this. Just because some of these action items have to do with curriculum or hiring practices, et cetera. So we need to make sure that everyone was on board with these action items. And so that's one thing. They've also given feedback on this. And Sean, I don't know if you were going to also talk to the fact that that Adam Jaffe also looked at it, because we wanted to get a student's perspective as well.
Yeah.
So those are the only extra things that I was going to add. And then, I'm ready to hear from the other board members. I think what we drafted is pretty black and white as far as, no pun intended, but pretty clear as far as what the language is. And so we're really, at this point, I'm just ready to hear from, my fellow board members.
Great. Jason, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think we did a good job of listening to the community and brainstorming and really being vigilant about other school districts who have also put together a resolution. Idea of how we want the beginning of this thing to start and look. So I think that it was very thoughtful and tough conversations, and honestly I look forward to having many more tough conversations around this work that will help strengthen our district moving forward. But like everyone else has said, I look forward to hearing what you all have to say, the rest of the board.
Great, thanks. So questions. So Gary, David, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go first. First off, thanks guys. I appreciate you putting the time in on this. I know we did a lot of pre-read on that first go around, and this is a notable change. It's much improved. So thank you. I guess my biggest thing is, policies and documents, oftentimes go into a file to be forgotten. So what steps do we have in place to make sure that we're monitoring and tracking and reporting out on this? I know it doesn't necessarily live in the policy document, but has the work been done to tie it back to the strategic initiatives? And, is there someone whose charter is to conscientiously track and manage and report out on this so that we can ensure that it's on the top of mind for everybody as we go forward?
Yeah, so this is actually going to be the action steps that you are seeing in here are actually going to be connected to the strategic plan. And there's going to be a dashboard that's going to be connected to the strategic plan as well, that is going to be reported out to the board on a regular basis. And so we're going to hold ourselves accountable to these things that are in the resolution through our strategic plan. And then the other thing that we talked about, and I'm sorry we didn't mention this, is that we didn't want this resolution to be something that was just something that is like in a file. We want it to be something that is going to be prevalent for our students as well. So one of the things we talked about is once we have this resolution approved, we're thinking about how we make this prevalent for our students. So how do we put this in our classrooms? How do we look at the language in here and then change the language maybe developmentally for students at the lower levels? So that way we can make sure that it's not just something that is owned by the Board of Education or the administration, but like as a district, we are collectively responsible for it. So yeah, it'll be connected to our strategic plan. And then we're also looking at ways to make the language prevalent for our students as well.
And I would also add that we talked about having this and all of the work tied to it in a more prominent place on our website so that it's easy for the public to access and it's not buried somewhere, that it is, you know, on the forefront of the page and in the forefront of our minds as far as the work that we're doing.
Great. Gary, any thoughts?
Yeah, I will maybe share a couple things and then ask a couple of questions. First of all, I think I just want to acknowledge that I'm also thank you guys for working on this, but I just have to acknowledge this is a really hard thing to, I mean, honestly, to let go of and not be working on right now, because we had a lot of conversation about it. We've gotten a lot of input about it as a board and as individuals, and just if you're, I mean, just being in our society and our culture right now, it's very, very prevalent and a constant topic. It was really hard for me to not be in the middle of this while you guys were working on this. I just want to acknowledge that. I wanted to see what was going on, and I wanted to see where we were, where the ideas were going. But I did. I was happy to see what came out of this. I think there's a lot of really good things here. I definitely have some questions that I want to like get more into what you were thinking about or probe where we were going with. But I think there's a lot of good here, and I would. You know, I certainly support everything in this. I think there are areas that I want to kind of probe and see what exactly we mean by it and what we're going to do next and some things like that. But that's kind of the overall framework. I guess maybe to get into some more specific, you know, questions or maybe offer some things to discuss a little bit. I'm interested in some of the specifics around timing. You know, if you read a document that's a page long and there are things that it comes from any kind of governing board, the most critical reader is going to look to things that involve money. And whenever there's talk about money, they're going to hone in on that. So I did that too. And when I looked at, we are committed to allocating financial resources, you know, ... I spent a lot of time thinking about those things. And some of the first things that I wanted to know about that is like, how are we going to tie that allocating financial resources to a timeline? When are we going to do this? What are we going to say we're going to do it? Obviously, we're taking some steps on some of these things, I know, but I don't know that we have all the answers to that, but how will we provide a timeline? How will we tie ourselves to some specific, you know, just anchoring this in the context of time? So I don't know who wants to chew on that a little bit, but that I'll throw that out there.
Yeah,
Sean,
oh, go ahead, Jason.
no, I was just saying, Sean, do you want to answer that?
Okay, I was going to say that that's why I think it's really important that this is connected to our strategic plan, and that, you know, we're going to have timeframes and all of the goals that we have connected to our strategic plan and reporting out. And like we've talked about, is that we have to keep coming back to those, so that way it's that evergreen model of like, what do we need to adjust here? What do we need to change? What are we not seeing movement? And then the other thing too is that we need to really be specific about what resources we're aligning to our goals. And I don't know if we've always been the best about connecting all resources to goals, because I think that that's where we have to, you know, if we're going to be working towards something, you have to put the money towards it, or the human capital. And I think that evidence of that is that we are allocating funds to the director position, which I think is a great sign of how we're utilizing our resources in a new and different way. But yeah, we definitely have to have timelines.
And the training is happening too, not for the board yet, but for the staff.
Mhm.
That's something we've also already planned.
What do we think about the board, the timeline for the board on that? I mean, do you guys-
I'm thinking that we have to do that this fall right away, like trying to figure out where
gonna
what
ask if we
direction
can
we
do
want to
this.
go. Mhm.
I
And
agree.
so next week we're meeting again, and we're going to be looking at calendar for the board for the year. And I'm thinking that would be a great time for us to determine like how do we want to schedule this time, and then what do we want that look like. I think that there's some definite resources that I'd propose to the board for the training. The Crossroads training, the anti-racism Crossroads training is something that I think would be an exceptional opportunity. I think that we just have to, when we're looking at timeline, and I know we just have to look at what's going to be best in terms of with the pandemic too. Like some of the training is not going to be as effective on a virtual. So we have to look at just making that decision about when's the best time to do that.
Gary, did you have some other questions, specific questions? Go ahead if you want.
I'll just say on the training, I mean, again, I'm not committing anyone else, or I'm speaking, it's just me speaking. I think that that's important that we do that as soon as we can, and that we commit as a district to facilitating that happening as soon as we can. And personally, I would like to do that as soon as possible, whatever that means, bearing in mind what you're saying about the current situation and their load. And
yeah, all of our administrators went through an anti-bias training last week, and it was interesting. It was like it was a 9 to 3 type of experience, but it was all on Zoom, but it really worked. And so it's just a matter of us making that commitment to do it, and it was well done.
I will say the one other specific question, I'm trying to put this in a question and not just editorials. I don't know how well that's going to work, but I wondered about having, not necessarily in this document, but maybe how this would inform an area of our district specific to staffing and what our staff and our faculty looks like versus what our students look like, and how we'll talk about that, how we'll measure that. I'm not saying I want to change this resolution to put something specific to that, because I don't even know what that would be right now. But I think I don't know if you guys thought about that, or if you thought about ways that this could lead to some steps that we could talk about how well we're doing in that area, or how well we're not doing in that area, whatever it might be, however we define it. So that's another thing that I had thought about. If anybody has anything they want to share about that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and I am just reading through that again.
I think, like, Gary, are you referring to the last bullet point maybe? So like that we'll receive timely updates with measurable data, but we didn't really specify when or how often.
Yeah, I mean, that it certainly is a part of that. I
think what's missing is the hiring part.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah, I think that, and I thought that we had.
I mean, I'm not sorry. I'm not necessarily saying it's missing. I'm just saying, where does this take us in terms of our hiring goals? What in here helps us to develop those, or says that we will develop those if that's something that we want to have in here, which seems important to me.
Yeah.
It is, and we talked about that actually, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't see it. I know we talked about that. So
Right.
We will have to come back to that. The other thing too is I want to make sure that we do whatever is right for this resolution, and I just don't want to rush it. So if we're feeling like there's things missing and we need to bring it back, we also have another meeting next week. But I wanted to make sure that whatever we're doing is right. And so if we have to not approve this tonight, but I want to get it approved, but it's not that the work's going to stop because this resolution's not passed. I just want to make sure we get it right. And so I just want to put that out there.
Let me ask you this question. So so we put this resolution together, but then what is the long-term, what does an anti-bias, anti-racist, good benchmark in the future, some date, what does it look like? Like, what is your, like, okay, we're really starting to, make some headway in this space from anti-bias, anti-racist. What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think that what I would say is that we have, first of all, thinking about putting the number of staff through a certain type of training, making sure we build capacity and maintaining that data. But then the other thing too is like collecting the baseline data about how our students are feeling, how our parents are feeling, how we're looking at incidents of discipline, incidents of reports of racism. I think that's when we see a benchmark change, like after we collect some of that baseline data and we're measuring that over a period of time, we want to make sure we're seeing growth and improvement of that. And I think that is going to be something that we have to monitor very closely. And so if we're putting these things in place, but we're not seeing any change in the data, then we're not meeting our benchmarks. I think that's how I would measure that in terms of, and then the other thing too is like we are collecting data about how people feel in terms of sense of belonging, making sure we are, I would also look at our hiring in terms of looking at, if we're committed to making our population look like our student population, then we'd also see some changes in that as well and keep monitoring that. So
Sean, can I add something to that too? I think that, and I think that this is, I think that, again, everybody I think did great work. But I do think that it is critical to tie this work to the strategic plan, as has been noted, because that's really the guiding document for the whole district. So that will really mean that it will happen. I also think it's critical that we have a scorecard that for this work specifically, so that we are measuring each piece, right? So that we don't take a long time to have the baseline, right? We look at, where are we with hiring? We know where we are. Where are we with standardized test scores? Where are we with culture and climate? Where, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because I do think, and we've talked about it before, I think we often talk about the, the kind of the pandemic of COVID, which is the new one, but there's an old one, which is a pandemic of racism, right? It's just not new, right? So we got dual pandemics, and we got people are just recognizing it more. And so it's appropriate that we have it linked to our strategic plan, but it's also appropriate that we have a very specific way to measure it and report out on that, whether it's good or bad, right? We got to be willing to say, hey, we didn't do well, or we did do well, and why.
Is there a way to measure teacher responsiveness to anti-bias, anti-racism, like the training? Like, how do we measure how they're feeling about it and how it's being implemented? Beyond the idea of an outcome, like a child being affected, beyond the outcome of someone being, injured in the process, like, how do we measure it before it gets to that point?
Yeah, I definitely think there's measures for us to get input for how people are feeling about this from our staff, from our parents, from our students. I think that I don't have what that exactly would look like, but there are different ways to be able to collect that data through surveys, through focus groups, through, just different ways that we collect data and input from like Panorama and those kinds of things. So I think that there's ways for us to use that as a measure. If we're not seeing that people are feeling like there's changes within the culture, then that's something that we need to address. People are feeling like
Right.
things are still the same, and there's a problem.
Is there, so I know you heard from the community and staff that's excited about this, but have you heard from staff and community, but more so staff in this case, that is not excited about this, that's against this?
I have not heard of any staff members saying that they're against this work. I think
This is great.
I think that one of the things that a challenge that we would face is that everyone has their own perception of themselves in terms of how they come into this work. And I do think that some people feel like they've already arrived, or it's not me, or not. And so I do think that sometimes is hard because, but I think that that's part of this work, is having those hard conversations and doing some self-examination that is causing people to maybe feel uncomfortable. But yeah, I have not had people say that they're against this work.
So has anyone expressed their discomfort to you about the resolution, about, because like, I was thinking about this earlier about, so for example, one of the bullets talks about an audit on materials being used for teaching, right? So that's one aspect of auditing. But the other aspect is the equitable part, is bringing in books that some teachers haven't even used or haven't thought about using. History lessons that have been kind of ignored throughout them having to now learn something and then implement it in the classroom. Have you thought about that? Have we thought about that, A, and B, is that something we're concerned about, and B, and then C, is that a concern to you in particular in getting this work done?
No, I mean, it's really not. I mean, I would say that if you look at the curriculum documents and curriculum review reports that we've brought forth to the board in literacy and social studies, you would see that those have been goals that have been set. And we might need to go back and just take a closer look at them, but I feel like there is enough momentum moving forward that people are feeling like that is a priority. We have to look at the types of texts that we're using. We have to look at the types of, like even the way you're teaching history. Is it a single story? Is it? So we have to make sure that we are looking at broader perspectives with our lessons and our books that we use. But I would say that people are already embracing that, and that feels good already in terms of the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years. Is that you can see that there is a pattern in what we've been bringing forth in terms of our curriculum review documents.
Other questions or comments? Jason might be frozen. I'm not sure.
So the only other thing I was going to add is that we had student look at the resolution as well, our student board representative. And some of the things that are in here, the just suggestions are really around making sure that we're committed to, like if we're committed to restorative practices, how are we going to measure that? Similar to what the board has shared. And how we are going to make sure that we're giving public updates about this work. And then there was a couple things that were just, they're almost like different word choices using, using words such as eliminating racism versus interrupting racism, and using words such as dismantling versus eliminating. So it's just like reversing them, but I think that the meaning is staying pretty much the same. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that we had some student eyes on this as well. One of the other thoughts were just like the words, the deaths and injustices. And so the word murders versus deaths, because they said that might be more powerful than what we have there. So I just wanted to throw that out to you as from a student perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Other thoughts or questions about this?
So, hi guys, I have kind of a weird question. I don't know, is there, it's kind of a little bit of a, in the same vein that Jason touched on, you know, do we have the ability to look at, and I'm going to just throw it out there, I may not be articulating this very well, unorthodox lessons that have been kind of buried over time that we can bring to light and incorporate into our classes? I mean, there's a lot of things that have been done locally and, you know, abroad. I'm thinking specifically around some, you know, foundations of early forms of healthcare for, you know, Black Americans way back in, you know, the early 1900s. I mean, there's a lot of lessons that have happened over the years that just aren't taught, I don't believe. And I'm not suggesting we throw the world on its head, but I think that, you know, we have a little bit of a latitude where we can maybe cut our own path and incorporate some of these stories of the past and educate our children about things that have happened that probably aren't so great, and, you know, what we've learned and what we're doing. I'm not wanting to open up a can of worms. I think it would be great if we can pull up some of this stuff that's been buried and start incorporating it into curriculum.
Thank you. I don't know if I have the answer for that. I mean, I think that our curriculum coordinators and our teachers are willing to look at that, and looking at the text that we're using, looking at the literature we're using, looking at, again, like single stories. Sometimes it's like one perspective. I think the other thing too is that we need to have the opportunity to be able to facilitate conversations about race in an effective way. And I think that it's not just about the content, but to be able to facilitate these with students in a sensitive way that's going to be meaningful, because sometimes people feel uncomfortable about that. And I think that if we're going to have a different look in our curriculum, we do need to have a different way of having conversations about race and leaning into those. And similar, like how we just, you know, how we set norms. But I think that would also be connected to that.
Any other?
Along those same lines, that David was on, I think that was an excellent point, David. So I'm going back to the teachers, right? And it's about, and this is about perspective. If it's hard, so it's going to be difficult. Not that it can't happen, but how do we support teachers who don't operate from that lens, who don't see the world as, even with the training, like you don't see the world the way we're trying to convey it through the resolution, right? How do you get teachers, how do you support them? And then secondly, then what's the timeline on, so number one, and this is the word policing is not as, it's more of an academic term I'm about to say. How do we police that process? And then third, what is the timeline on how long we're willing to give teachers to come around on this perspective, right? Like how do, and you know what I'm saying? Like, so how do we, A, how do we support? B, what's the timeline on this? And then how long do we give someone to get around to becoming an effective teacher who is able to talk from this new perspective. It's because it may not be for some, but for many it will be.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that one of the things that we have been doing is when we're talking about support, we talk about that we have to also build capacity with the people who are providing supports in the classroom, such as our coaches, our administrators, our other literacy specialists. And we've actually done some training with some of our of those types of leaders who are going into classrooms and providing feedback around how to use culturally responsive lens, equity lens. And so it's not just about one person that's holding that person accountable. It's about building capacity of those people who are giving feedback on an ongoing basis are the ones that are going in and giving feedback and having those hard conversations. The other thing too is that part of this work that we're committed to is looking at our standards of professional practice. And so that means that's our accountability for how we do evaluations and how we measure what success is happening in the classroom and how we provide feedback. And that's also how we evaluate our teachers. And so if we're holding people to those standards and we're changing those to a way that, it's a responsibility that you are taking that anti-bias, anti-racism lens in your classroom, and we're not seeing that, and we're not seeing it in terms of effective strategies in the classroom or students are being marginalized, then that's where we have the mechanism to be able to hold people accountable to that. And of course, we always work to grow first. We provide feedback, work to grow. But if we're seeing patterns over a period of time where someone is not moving forward or consistently is doing things that's marginalizing our students, then we will have those hard conversations and move people forward. I mean, I just think I can't tell you what the exact timeline is but we will hold people accountable to that.
Right, and
I think people will hold themselves accountable to that as well.
Right, and I didn't think you would have an answer. It was more on the latter part of your answer. I didn't think that would be for my question, that you would actually have it. But it's just something for us to be thinking about, like how, I guess this kind of conveys the severity of what we're doing, right? By talking about, is there a timeline on how long I'm going to give you until you're able to get it together, or else? In this case, you know what that looks like in terms of holding someone responsible. That's what "or else" is. But I don't expect you to necessarily have an answer. I'm sure you'll develop that over the course of the year. Like, you'll be able to figure out what it looks like to you. Because I just keep thinking about sustainable injuries that kids are taking, and that parents have to unpack at home. If we're not moving at like light speed, to get this. And the thing is that in that process, we're going to make some mistakes.
Right.
So,
there's urgency to this work.
Right. But that's just my concern, is how long, and then, how much unpacking does a parent have to do in the evening time for an hour, of which 2 hours or 3 hours is really spent on homework, and 20 minutes is quality. So.
Other thoughts, questions?
How do you all feel about, like, right now, the word resolution is not in the title, but that's what we keep calling it. But this is a commitment. The word resolution is actually stronger, to be resolute in something is stronger than to be committed to it. So I know it's just a small detail, but amongst ourselves, we're calling it a resolution, but right now the title is just a commitment. I didn't know if anyone had any strong feelings about that.
Well, one thing I was going to ask is whether
I can't hear you, Gary.
am I on?
Yeah, you're just really low. Are you all experiencing the same thing? Is he low to you guys?
Nothing? Okay. Somebody else.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can?
You're on. Just speak a little louder.
Okay. I was going to ask about, resolutions tend to be things that we pass once, and has its point. I think, to your point, Stacy, of it being a commitment. Commitments tend to be things you have to renew or sometimes revise or adapt or whatever. I wondered about the idea of possibly making this a resolution to continually renew our commitment and to look at what that commitment is and how it maybe needs to change or respond to things that, what we've done or what's changed around us or whatever. So, I mean, throwing that out there as a concept that maybe what we need to be resolving is to look at what our commitment is on some kind of regular time frame. I mean, when was the last time any of us went back and read the last resolution, I think, that we passed, which was about gun violence? I mean, I worked on writing it, and I can't tell you when the last time I actually read it was. So I just an idea that maybe this is something that would make it a little bit more constantly in front of us and something that we're thinking about.
Well, I think by nature of this affecting the district's daily work truly in and out, and that it's so student centered. I mean, it's to me so different than the gun sense resolution that our district and we as a board have to be accountable to this every day. So I do think we will refer to this more often and be very aware of the language, all the time. But if it helps to change what we're calling it to do that, making it a more active document than a static one, we could do that.
Sean, let me ask you this question, Sean, in regards to the word commitment versus resolution. I understand what Stacey's asking, and I know what Gary's saying. Resolution is definitely is a stronger pack than the word commitment, especially legally. My question though is how do we make it even how do we make it even stronger? How do we make it policy where you have to be that way? Is that even possible for us to make it policy? These things are actually a policy, not just something we want to weave into like the ethos, but it's actually a board, not just board, but yeah, it's district policy. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yes, I think that it makes sense. I would have to think about how that would look in terms of policy. I think that there's definitely ways that this could influence policy. I think that what I would have to think about is like, how does it actually become, like when I think about policy, I think about how do we, I would just have to think on that one. I don't have an answer for that one yet, but I think that I hear what you're saying, like how to make it even stronger. I think that when Stacy brings up the commit, we went back and forth because when we started looking at this document, the first one with the whereases and all that, sometimes that seems very symbolic more than actually a commitment to change. And so we wanted to, when we used the word commitment, we wanted to make sure that it was something that was that we were going to do more than just put this in like a folder. It's like, okay, we did a resolution and moving forward. We wanted to make it action oriented, but I do think resolution means more, it is a little bit stronger. But yeah, I'd have to think on that, Jason, and how that would look in policy.
Yeah, because it just makes me think about like, once again, this being, right now it's fashionable. It could be fashionable. I know we mean what we say, but it could be fashionable. And then this could be performative, right? Which could look good. And then if things change in a year, economically or culturally in the United States, then this could be this could be by the wayside. And not to say that we don't care about this. It's just when it's, policy driven. I mean, we can enforce things on the district, on outcome, on ethos, on all those things that are important to us. So I'm just trying to think, is that something we should be thinking about? That this is policy driven stuff. How we're turning to policy driven language.
Jason, that's why it needs to be part of the strategic plan. Quite honestly, whether we use the word commitment or whether we use the words resolution on this is a document, right? I mean, I get it. We can use resolution or commitment, but if we put it as part of the strategic plan, that's the guiding document. And then we could break it out and make various policies around HR, various policies around, so you'd have to break it out. We wouldn't want one policy. We could look at different policies, but that's where the power is. I mean, this document is great. I'm not trying to knock it, but the document is not the power. The document is just it could be performative, right? If we don't do anything with this document, resolution, commitment, it is performative, right? If we don't link it to the strategic plan, if we don't think about what's next, it is performative.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, because time. I'm sorry. One last point.
Go ahead.
I mean, time is the thief of enthusiasm. Like over time, we lose our enthusiasm. And so, I mean, I do think you're right. If we're able to work it into the strategic plan and then break out policies from it, individual policies that come about, then I think that is more effective. But is that something, Sean, you're thinking about? Is that something that you're interested in doing? Because we're talking about. I don't even know if that's even something that we even do, or that I've even read. I know we've argued about, for example, policy language around abortion. Remember, we had those conversations about like teaching abortion, who can come into school, like that's policy driven. And if we do it, like we were kind of nervous about being sued. How do we get that same kind of structure? I want that same kind of, deference isn't the word, but that same type of weight on what we're putting together right now. It's just a comment. You all don't have to.
Well, I do have, Jason, you have a really good point. I have a couple comments on that. I do think by signing this, as a board, now we are responsible for, first of all, when we evaluate Sean, has he followed through on this? But also when we are doing hearing curriculum updates, now we need to refer back to this and remember that we were committed to these specific things. So we need to think about that when we're asking our clarifying questions, in presentations and from all of the administrators. So I do think by signing this, we are making ourselves accountable to the work. And as board members, that means at meetings, we need to ask those hard questions of the administrators. Are they following through, and are the teachers following through? But I also remember, Jason, you actually had a great idea one of the times we met, which is wherever, like on the website where this document is housed, you suggested that we have some drop-down menus of more specific actions and timelines about when things are happening so the public could go see it, that were maybe too specific to belong in this resolution, but that were necessary. So I do think, I remember you bringing that up once, which I also think is a great idea to hold us accountable too.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think people need to be able to go to the website, go to some documents, be able to read and really get a good understanding of what we're trying to do specifically, what we talked about earlier. But just one more time, I'm kind of drive this home a little bit, just to make sure we're on the same page. And I think Joe, if we decide, if we wanted this done, this is a board-driven thing versus what Sean would want, right? If we want it to be policy, we'd have to say we want it to be policy, right? Is that how it works?
Not necessarily. We work in partnership with administration. So,
So it's not what we want.
well,
It's not, so the board doesn't dictate like the vision of this component.
I don't think I'm understanding your question. I'll go back to what I said before, which is it should be linked to the strategic plan, which is what we approve. And if it's linked to the strategic plan, then in essence, we're at the board's level, we're giving direction in essence to Sean and staff that those are the goals to, make sure that they take care of. So, I mean, that's the way to do it.
Right, but so if we want these things, these items to be put into the strategic plan and broken out as policy, that's something we would have to say we want done. We would want to see it done. How they implement it is something that that's where we don't get involved in that. But we say the outcome we want to be this. This is the outcome, and if we want that to happen, that's what we say, right? As a board, as a body that governs the district, right? Correct.
That's why the scorecard is so important. So we set the scorecard of what as part of the strategic plan, and then yes, the how it gets done, right? I mean, Janet Tilley might talk about it in our board orientation, actually, the difference between our 50,000 feet versus the 10,000 feet of the superintendent. But yeah, we set what is the overall goal, and then the administration figures out the how to get there, and we measure it, right, and hold the administration accountable for it.
Because that's something that we could also include in this document, right? Is that we do want this to become policy, school district policy, right? Which then gives it a different type of even more of it's more of a directive, right? As opposed to, because right now, even with the commitment, even with the resolution, it's still like it's unjust. I like to see this happen, but if it doesn't, I really can't hold you accountable for it. But with policy, we're saying, look, man, this is what we want done. This is how we want to see the district. This is our vision of the district.
I guess what I would say is that when we talk about the strategic plan, I think that is where that's where we would examine policies that are related to those action items. I think that you have a responsibility of setting the what, and then we have the responsibilities administrative, and I have the superintendent to make sure that I'm fulfilling what it is. And that's what, like Stacy says, you evaluate me along the way to see whether or not we're making strides on these goals. And so I do think that there are going to be times when we're going to be going through this work and we're like, oh, one of the reasons why we're having issues is because we have this policy in place. We need to change that policy, or we don't have a policy in place for this. So that's where I think that along the way, I'm just still trying to figure out, like, how does this become actual policy? And I think that maybe that might be something we can get some consult, even from MSBA, get us some support in terms of how that looks. But I think that along the way, there's going to be different paths along this work that we're going to say, okay, we need to stop and say, do we need to change policy or add policy? So that way it becomes even stronger.
And this is my last question. This is just, since we're just having a dialogue. So the MSBA doesn't have policy around this. Am I right or wrong? I mean, I haven't read any MSBA policy similar to what
we have policy
right
around anti-discrimination. We have anti-discrimination policies. I think this is different, but I think it's connected, but we can look into that.
I would just add to, this is a place where I think we have to be careful, right? Because again, we're we set the what, and the administration works on the how. And we as a board, at least historically, have tended to want to, because of course we all have an opinion on the how. We may not be experts, by the way, but we all have an opinion on how somebody should be trained. We have an opinion on how somebody should be recruited. We have an opinion on how somebody should be tested, et cetera, et cetera. And so we just have to be careful that we're giving the administration the latitude for the how when we set the what. And so we just have, I mean, that's the balance that we have to be careful. And again, historically have certainly gotten into the how.
No, you're right. You're right. You're right. And I look, this is the one-sided. You see, I'm the one talking, and I'm the one asking the questions, and everyone else is playing defense. So I got, and that's a good point. I don't want to turn this into a Jason against everyone play D on Jason, but based on what I understand how we will operate, we do say what we want, and if we want this type of change that we're talking about, we have to also state it and say this is what we want our outcome to be. I'm not saying we need to get into the administration's work and come in there and help analyze Sean and Melena, the people who are professionals who know what they're doing. But what I am saying is that if we want something done, we need to be able to say, this is what we want to see. I want to see this in some way become policy. And because some of us are managers and some of us understand management. And there's not a lot of difference between rules and regulations and operating standard operating procedures to help people stay within the guidelines and to achieve goals. In this case, making sure we're successful at putting out great products, make sure our teachers are effective, make sure we're not discriminating, make sure we're not doing all these different things. So I'm saying that we should be thinking about that. I think that is something we should be thinking about. And there's nothing wrong with taking that bold step. I don't look at it as getting in the weeds. I'm looking at it as saying we want to be transformative and innovative, and we got to start doing innovative stuff that isn't necessarily popular right now.
I mean, the only thing that I would say, Jason, is, I mean, our school has hundreds of policies, right? I mean, just sitting through your guys' board meetings the last couple of years, you guys review a dozen policies easy and implement or change or tweak some of the language in policies every board meeting. So, you know, we got a policy on lice. We got a policy on what to do if a kid comes to school with a fever. I mean, I just want to make sure that we are understanding the difference between a policy and a resolution or a commitment, and that this doesn't get diluted by trying to shift the discussion towards policy. Because I hear what you're saying about if there's a policy in place and it's enforced and it's clear, but those policies are usually especially within the school, different than in a corporate environment. Those policies are so caught up in the minutia of exactly what they're trying to define so that they're clearly understood by students, teachers, parents, administrators for whatever it is that the policy is defined around. And I'm just not sure that we're there yet with this work, which is why we have the director of equity coming in, and which is why when you and Stacey and I talked the first time, I think we met with Sean, we talked about in terms of how to keep this alive, using language that we can adopt for kids in the classroom from kindergarten through high school. I mean, I think some of that stuff actually gets the work out there and gets the work going. And then the policies follow, after that. I would hate to see us spend so much time figuring out how we can get this into a policy and then it get lost amongst the hundreds of other policies that are out there for the school. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. There are a lot of policies out there, but I mean, when things come out, we can extrapolate the policy and match it to the what's happening to make sure that we are following the policy and procedures to deal with that situation that we're having to apply a policy to. One thing I think about when I think about policy, I think about the Articles of Confederation, right? I think about the amendments. I think about freedom for African Americans is an amendment. It wasn't always like that, right? So at first it was just like, you know, we were slaves. Black folks were enslaved, and then there was this 3/4 of a man, and then there was an amendment. And if it wasn't without that amendment, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And that's what I mean by policy. Like, that's an amendment. My freedom right now, I'm able to talk to you like this, like on an equal basis, because of an amendment, which forces us to create policies and rules and regulations that allow us freedom and not to be discriminatory. So I just want to make sure we're clear about what I'm saying. I'm not trying to belabor any points here, but I am talking about, you know, this is great. I like the idea of the resolution, but maybe we should be thinking more also about how this could be policy, just like we think about amendments. The amendment for African Americans to be seen as equal and free.
Yeah, but I mean, again, we're starting to have an academic discussion here, but there's a difference between policies. Amendments are laws, right? And there's a difference between policies and laws. I mean, Gary, you're the lawyer in the room. Like, there is a difference between a policy and a law. An amendment is an enactment or a change to the law. So again, I don't want to parse like the definitions. I'm not sure that that's productive in the context of this discussion, but I want to make sure that we're not confusing the different things, regardless of, you know, what they contain, because there's a difference. There's a difference between policy and law.
I'll let someone else talk.
Well, I would just say, I think, Jason, I totally hear what you're saying. I still think the strongest way in school land is twofold. The strategic plan, which we're lucky, we have typically strategic plans are 3 to 5 years. We have an update of our strategic plan, a new strategic plan. So link it there, because that's the guiding map for the whole school district, and Sean's goals. Those are the two ways. And then if there are policies that need to be changed because there is no way, any other way to get to those goals that are in the strategic plan or Sean's goals, then we'll work with the administration to change them. But I think that's the strongest way. That's all I'm saying. It's not that there won't be policy change. There might be. It's just the best way. The best two ways are superintendent goals and strategic plan. Strongest way to get anything done in a school district.
Does anyone at all besides, I know Joe and Kim don't really agree with what I'm saying. Not that you disagree, but you're not necessarily on the same page. Does anyone else see what I'm saying, or am I the only one who thinks like this?
I was going to say earlier, and I don't know that this is agreeing or disagreeing, but like I think that there is no one policy that this should become. I don't think this should become a policy necessarily, because it's not really how our policies are all kind of tracked to different. A lot of them are tracked to statutes that create the requirements for policy, or they're tracked to the structure of our district, you know, finance, you know, enrollment, whatever it might be. But I think this should inform our review and possibly require amendments to policies throughout our entire scope of policies, and should be a part of what we're doing in the process every time we look at one. I think it would be, we can't adopt one policy that then makes this reality. That's, I don't think. I think this is a commitment to doing more to make sure everything that we do and all of our policies address this and are taking these commitments seriously. And that's why I was talking about like the reviewing it more often and thinking about it more than just one time, because as we go through all these policies, and maybe we need to do a policy audit to see where specific things need to be changed. But to me, you know, I mean, that's a little bit more, that's less boring to me than it is to probably everybody else. But I wouldn't think that would be crazy, but I don't think this becomes one policy or anything else becomes one policy. I think all the policies should be up to be changed if they need to be changed, subject to these things we're saying. That's how I would.
Right, and for the record, I'm not saying that this resolution needs to become one policy. I'm saying that I'm agreeing with Joe. In order to create policy, you have to weave it into the strategic plan. And from there, we would extrapolate pieces, items that will then become policy. So that I agree with. But I'm just saying, does anyone see what I'm saying? Does anyone agree with what I'm saying? Because I mean, most of what we're doing here is me saying something and then everyone's playing defense. So, I mean, and you may not see this. It may take a second look, but this is how I'm feeling here. My observation is I'm saying something and everyone's playing defense.
But Jason, are you saying that we're playing defense because we're not saying the same thing you are? I don't understand why it's considered defense.
Pretty much, yeah, because everyone's defending where this stage on where we are right now, which is cool. But I'm exploring the possibility of making this concretized or more just having more weight to it than just being a commitment. You know, a commitment's cool, but I can't hold you accountable on a commitment.
But the steps for accountability are the strategic plan and Sean's review. I mean, that's where we build in the commitment. I'm not trying to be offense or defense. I'm not a sports guy, so I'll screw up an analogy. I'm just sitting here thinking the way to enact change is by tying it to a strategic plan and tying it to measurable, accountable goals in the superintendent's program. And so for me, I'm not engaging. I haven't engaged in the last 45 minutes because from my seat, it's simple. That's how we do it. And to Gary's point, a step further, as we go through the process and we identify a policy that comes up, we're like, oh hell, this policy's bunk. We need to tweak this so that we're reflecting, something back in the strategic plan. I mean, it's going to take 3 years to cycle through, a quarter of all the policies that we've got. I just don't think that this is a policy initiative. We make it accountable by building it into the plan, which was my initial question. We further that accountability by making sure that we are measuring Sean to execution through his annual goals. I don't want you to feel like I'm not in your corner. I just don't see, it's just not that complicated. And I worry if we try to overcomplicate it, we're going to pivot too far and it's just going to get wonky.
Right. So once again, I agree with this. I agree with what you're saying. The process of weaving it into the strategic plan. The idea of this becoming, of these things, these items in this resolution becoming policy didn't come up until I mentioned the word policy. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I'm asking, should we as a board say, should we be also looking as a long-term plan to having some of these items become policy?
How would we do that, Jason? I think part of and I'm sorry to feel like you're on the defense, but part of us asking questions is to try to understand the perspective that you're coming from. Like, how would we make this into a policy the way that policies are executed and written in the school today? How would we do that? Like, how do we get from here to there? Like, can you show us what does that look like? I think that's what we're trying to understand.
Okay, so can I show you? I mean, I can't necessarily show you at the moment. So I'm also having a dialogue with you all too. But I'm saying, but we haven't thought about this becoming policy is the problem. Like we haven't thought about
because I
this.
think there's multiple steps that we're now kind of having a circular conversation, because I think that what we've all kind of agreed on, yourself included, saying, you know, after David said, yeah, I agree with that. After Gary, I agree with that. After, you know, just Joe spoke, he said, I agree with that. I think what we've talked about is it may get to that, but there's a number of steps before that. And the best step that we can take right now is using the strategic plan and the tools that we as a board have in place in order to direct Sean and the administrators of the school to make sure that the commitments that we have in here are reflected in the actual day-to-day operations of the school. And I think that's pretty strong. I mean, and again, I heard you say too, like, you know, a commitment isn't really, how strong is a commitment versus something else? Well, I mean, in my mind, like, I made a commitment to my husband, you made a commitment to your wife. Like, if we don't live up to those commitments, there's consequences for that, right? There's consequences for this if we don't, as a board, live up to this commitment, if we all decide that these are the commitments we're going to make and then we make those commitments public. I mean, it's not inconsequential or consequence free. So, I mean, I just want to put that out there too.
So can I make a suggestion? And I'm wondering about, I'm wondering about how we can pivot this conversation and how it might actually be helpful for us to get into our conversation with MSBA, because we might be able to get some clarity on that. I think that we can, I think what I'm looking at is, what do we all agree on? We agree on that this is, the words in here and the action steps in here are really important. We all agree that it has to be connected to strategic plan. It has to be measurable. We have to be held accountable to it. And I think we can all agree on that. I think right now it's at that question about policy. That might be something that we have to talk a little bit more about later. But I think where we are right now with where we are committed, I feel like that's really strong. And I think that that's where we need to move. And I think that the policies will be influenced by this work. But I'm wondering about whether or not going into our onboarding and hearing from MSBA might actually help us a little bit. But I'll just put that out there and see how you guys feel about that. I don't want to squelch the dialogue or the conversation, but just wondering about where we are with that.
Well, to that end, should we pause passing this resolution until until the 10th, right? I mean, how do people feel about that? Do you want to pass this resolution tonight? Or do you want to do it on the 10th? Because I mean, I think that in part informs where we go next. I agree, it's a perfect pivot to Janet, but we can't pivot until we close this discussion of, are we gonna pass this thing? Because we have a motion and a second on the floor, right? So we need to take a vote, right, at some point here. Are we going to pass this evening, or are we going to delay it till the 10th? So what are folks' thoughts there?
I mean, I take responsibility for this since I was one of the authors, but I would like to add to it about our hiring practices in that statement about allocating financial resources. So for that reason, I would like to wait till the 10th so that we could have that added at least.
Other thoughts?
I think in the end, it's going to be a living document, no matter what we pass tonight or not. So I think there's a component of it that's important that we get it on the books and that we evolve. If we're constantly trying to boil the ocean with perfect language, it's not going to happen. I think at the end of the day, we're going to be measured by actions, not by the resolution. So I'll just leave that there.
Other thoughts?
So I was more my line of questioning was only just for us to be thinking through this more critically. That's all. It wasn't about not passing the resolution this evening. I've always looked at this as a living document, but yeah, that's all. So yeah, so I was not saying, hey, let's don't pass it. I'm saying, should we, as a board, our goals are, our job is to do what? And I just want to make sure that So we want to make this really stick and really have some legs to it and really be able to hold people accountable and really make this part of the culture. Should it be policy? That's all I was asking. You know.
So Jason, what are your thoughts about passing this resolution this evening or not?
Yeah, I think I think we're gonna have to add a drop-down box anyways of information, right? So it doesn't matter if we pass it tonight or not. I think we should pass it. I think we should just get it out the way, pass it, and then start continuously working on it.
Yeah, I'm with Jason. I'm ready to vote on this so that we can actually get down to rolling up our sleeves and doing the work.
Yeah, and just Stacy, kind of addressing the hiring thing, since I did kind of throw that out there initially. I mean, I think this would be a perfectly reasonable way to address that would be to pass this resolution as written. And then we have things in here like we are committed to assigning measurable goals to our strategic plan in order to create racially equitable and anti-racist systems. There's plenty of things that as a step under that, we can direct administration to come back to us with a proposal regarding our hiring practices, statistics, accountability, however we want to get into the details on that would fit under here, even though we're not using those words in any of these sentences. I don't think, as I've read them, I think it would fit. So they're not inconsistent to pass this tonight and then still further direct the administration, hey, we want you to come back to us, like right away about establishing some goals around hiring. Does that make sense to you, or is that like, am I getting too far?
No, that makes sense. I think it's good that we have stuff that needs to be done after this is passed. I mean, I think it's great that Cameron hopefully starts, fingers crossed, within the next couple of weeks and, uses this as one of his onboarding documents. I mean, I think that's all great. Let's vote. That's my vote. Let's vote.
Stacy, you okay with that? Okay. All right. So let us vote then. If anybody doesn't have any more comments or questions, all in favor of passing this resolution?
I think Jason dropped out for a second, so now I want to say that again.
I'm back.
Okay. So, all right. So all in favor of passing the resolution?
Aye.
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 All right.
Any opposed? I don't think I heard any. All right, passes unanimously, 6-0. Thank you. And again, it's a living document. Well, this is not the last conversation, a good conversation, and we'll continue. So I want to ask you one other question, which is, as we transition into our board member orientation, I might, and we have Janet, because Janet's going to take about an hour, I think I'm going to suggest that we take like a 2 or 3 minute bio break here. Is that okay with everybody? Because I just, even to get up and stretch or whatever, I just want to make sure. Is that all right with everybody? Yes.
That's cool.
Okay. All right. So it's 8:04. We'll come back at, whatever, 8:08. If that's okay with everybody. I just want to make sure everybody's fresh and has gotten up and stretched. I will do it myself.
So central office administrators, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I was going to tell you that you can be dismissed And since this is going to be the onboarding portion, so really appreciate you being part of the meeting tonight.
Thank you, Sean.
Janet, I just wanted to say hello and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Absolutely. And I am gonna, it was really hard for me not to jump in. I'll be truthful in your discussion. But I have some things that I want to share with everybody.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll just wait when Jason and David get back. We'll just give them a second and then we'll start.
Can you hear me?
We can. Jason, are you ready to get going?
I can't hear you.
Okay. All right. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Okay. So
Hello?
yeah, we can hear you, Jason. We
It's
just
not
can't
working.
hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
I can't hear you. All right, I'm going back to my old school. Not working out.
All right.
Oh, why are trying to intervene?
Jason,
hear
can
me?
you hear us?
Yeah, I'm back. All right, I'm back.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we're going to get started back 5.01 MSBA's orientation. So, typically, obviously, we'd want to do this in person, but such is the life of COVID and doing it virtually. So we waited a little bit, hoping that we'd have an in-person opportunity, but it's just not feasible. So we're excited and thankful that Janet Tilley's going to spend a little time with us. I'm sure, Janet, you'll use our last conversation as a perfect example of things you want to illustrate for us.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm gonna hand it over to you and
Okay.
look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Well, thank you, first of all, for letting me sit in on that conversation, because you're right. I am going to refer to a couple of different things. But the first thing, I started taking notes as I was listening to you, and there are some things that I want to be able to send to you as a whole board, and to Sean, to you as well, that I think might be helpful resources for you. Our colleagues in Pennsylvania, and in Arizona and in Georgia have done a whole lot of work with the board's role in supporting equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-bias, anti-racism. And one of the things, Jason, when you were talking, one of the things that this is the Pennsylvania folk, have put together is that they have this wonderful support for boards in understanding the difference between equity being a topic and equity being the foundation to absolutely everything that you do. And one of the, you asked about whether MSBA has an equity policy, and here's where we'll share with you that we don't, and here's why. And that is when George Floyd was murdered, we probably had, I don't even know how many requests from boards going, can we just have an equity policy? Can you write one for us? Can you send it to us? Well, that means absolutely nothing. Because you can have the policy on paper, but the practices don't follow. And so what we have sort of found is that people who will ask us to write an equity policy for them haven't done the hard work. They haven't done the work behind it. And so it becomes just a document and there's no accountability to it. So one of the things that they've done in Pennsylvania is that they have been able to help boards see how equity becomes this foundational piece and it permeates absolutely everything. It permeates policy, the superintendent evaluation, program evaluation, the curriculum, the hiring of teachers, HR practices, discipline practices, all of those. And so one of the other things that we've been working on or going to start working on is a toolkit for school districts to use to be able to analyze all of the kind of current policies that you have through an equity lens. And that's not every policy. It's not like the policy, like, Kim was talking about the policy on lice, or whatever. You look at your policy on discipline, you look at your policy on hiring, you look at your policy on evaluation, you look at your policy on testing, all of those kinds of things, to be able to make sure that these things you're putting in a resolution or the things you're putting in a policy are things that you actually really do. Rather than just having that kind of, that performed wokeness kind of thing. It's like, ooh, check that off. I got a policy, look at us. So I just want you to know that the reason we don't have one is because we believe that you as a district have to do exactly what you're doing now. And that is to look at your data on your kids and to understand where they are and what's going on with them, identify the barriers that your kids face, look at the systemic practices that create those barriers and how to help remove them, and to make sure that the accountability comes through the policy, but all of your policies, not just one, and through your governing documents. And so I just want you to know that when you were talking, it was really hard for me not to jump in because I'm going, yeah, I get it. And just know that the things that you were sharing, I really was taking note of. And just know that I'm going to kind of use your thoughts and your processes as we work this next fall. And don't be surprised, Sean and team, that I'm not calling the Clayton School Board and saying, we need your help. We need your help with developing this toolkit. We need your help in figuring this out and to ask for your feedback. So I hear you. I just sort of wanted to explain some things that I'm going to send to you tomorrow, some of the resources. that I will be sending to you. The other, I think I mentioned Arizona as well. But anyway, I'll send those to you, and it helps to give you that school board lens. But I think what I heard in your voice is that you want some accountability. You use that word. I heard that, you know, for this resolution that you have going forward. And there are ways to do that. Okay, so, all right. I'm going to adapt kind of what I had intended to share with you. I will tell you, friends, that normally this is like a 2-hour romp or journey. I have created for you the Reader's Digest condensed version to make it as kind of simple, but it is about creating what I call kind of schema or shared background knowledge with all of you about just some core governance practices. So David and Kim, welcome to your school board journey. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. All right. And there's nothing like starting this journey in the middle of a pandemic, you know, congratulations. So this is going to be good. All right. Here we go. I'm going to see if if I can share my screen, and I think I've got it right here. And my hope is that you can see. Okay, can you see them? Hello?
Yes, we can see it. Yep.
Okay, all right, cool. All right. I am going to ask you to unmute because I'm going to ask you questions as we go through. And so you have to participate. You don't get to just like sit and get. I'm so sorry. All right, so here we go. I know that Sean has and Sandy has copies of the PowerPoint. I don't know if it was sent to you ahead of time, but I will make sure that you have a copy of it, and then all of the accompanying documents that go with it. So we're really going to be talking about just the core pieces of good governance practices. And one of the things that you've already done as a district is that you created, this is part of the beginnings of your strategic plan, creating what you called the portrait of a graduate. And you had this core question to it, which I loved. And that is, what are the skills and the mindsets that your kids need for success in this rapidly changing world? And I imagine when you drafted this, you had no idea, you know, obviously, of what was going to happen in March. And the mindsets that they would have to actually have. So what I'm doing is that I'm going to challenge you as a board this year to create a portrait of a governance team. And that means Sean and the board together. And to answer that same question of what are the skills and the mindsets that you as a governance team need for success in this rapidly changing and complex world. And I think it will be a wonderful thing to be able to create that along with in your strategic plan, just giving you a suggestion, you know, or whatever that, you know, of showing and modeling for your teachers and for your kids that you are about this improvement as well. So in order to answer that question, there's some real basics that, that I'm going to go through kind of quickly, but I'm also going to weave in the discussion that you have already had. And I know that several of you are attorneys and that you understand kind of the legal guidance behind this, but sometimes new board members don't remember or know, or it's hard for your stakeholders to know that when you were elected to a team. You were not elected as an individual. And so your authority comes from the team, not from, you know, being an individual kind of representative for certain folk. And that is supported by your board policy, but it's also supported by Missouri case law. So that's where your power is. Your power comes from being with the team.
Hey, Janet, are you moving your PowerPoint presentation?
I am. Can you not see it?
I just want to make sure that, no, it's still on the first page. And so I just didn't know if you, when you were referencing things that was not moving forward. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure how to correct that. Okay, it says that I am sharing Let me try.
You may want to
This-
unshare it and do it again.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
nope, I apologize. You know, who knows with. Is it not working still?
It's now, yeah, it looks like it's just there. It's moving now.
Okay, all right.
It's still in your, it's not in your present mode.
Yeah, I'm having trouble getting it into the present mode.
Okay.
So
That's
I'm just gonna tell you,
Okay,
how's this?
great.
Can you see that okay? I apologize.
Yeah,
We're
that's
just gonna,
better.
you know,
We can see
Thank
it.
you.
well,
You
it's
just
kind
have to click on each slide to move it down.
okay. And you can see this, right?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So thanks for letting me know that. All righty. And so again, just the whole idea that you have no individual authority. So I'm going to give you a scenario. And this one is actually true. It happened in a school district that we worked with, and we call it Be My Witness. And I just want to get your thoughts on how to handle this particular one. So this Mrs. Smith approaches you with a request. She believes her daughter is not being treated fairly by the volleyball coach, who also happens to be her math teacher. And Mrs. Smith wants to sit down and have a heart-to-heart with the coach, just to get things out in the open, but she really wants a witness with some authority to be a part of the conversation. And Mrs. Smith, who contributed to your campaign, would like you, as the board member, to be that person. Okay, this is where you have to unmute and you have to talk to me. Thoughts?
No, you should not
Concerns?
do it.
Okay, well, why?
Well, it goes outside of the chain of command. I mean, Mrs. Smith needs to address that with the coach. And if it doesn't get anywhere with the coach, and she needs to go to the school administrator that the coach reports to. And I mean, there's procedures and there's structures that are in place to do that. And as a sitting board member, I mean, it's almost an act of intimidation, not to mention the ethical, part of sitting down at a table with Mrs. Smith and the coach as a witness, especially when there's a minor involved and it involves, details about a child.
And what's causing her to ask you this, though? What's her viewpoint about you as a board member?
That I have power that she doesn't have.
Right, or that you have power that you really don't have, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay, all right. And so sometimes in the beginning, when you're doing your board service or whatever, there will be those people who think that you have more power than what you really do. I have used this particular one because I know that you have read that book on the governance core. And in that particular text, there is, thank you, Sean. Okay.
And Kim and David are getting a copy. They have not had a chance to read it yet.
Okay. Well, they talk about it in the beginning part of it about, kind of the issues between governance and politics, because politics comes into play a lot with these things as well. So we know that that is part of the process. Okay, I'm lost my cursor, so. Okay.
So all of the board members also have this in board docs too.
Yeah.
There you are. I see.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah, you're on the collective governance authority slide. And I think if you just click down. I'm so sorry that's not working.
No, I'm sure it's on my end. And so what I'm going to do is to stop sharing again. And just apologize to you because I have not had this problem before.
Chris, is there anything that's on our end that would be able to, we'd be able to help Janet?
Oh, sorry, I'm checking. I couldn't get my thing to unmute. Other than sharing her presentation myself and walking through it, I don't see anything different on the way that we're set up.
Okay, and you're not seeing,
That looks good. We can see that.
okay, phew, okay, all right. So where are they? These are the board members. They are,
On the arch.
yeah, there you go, at the very top of it. And so I use this as a visual just to know and to help kind of talk about it. And Joe talked about this too, about the whole thing with understanding that broad view, that 50,000-foot view. That if you're at the top of the arch, you can see Busch Stadium, you can see, you know, Budweiser Brewery, you can see out to Forest Park, those kinds of things. And that we have to have somebody who stays at this level. Because if not, the vision is lost. And then it is Sean's responsibility to take this view, which is still, again, that 10,000-foot view, but it is looking at more of the operational types of things. And then this is the staff view. Here are your principals. Here are your staff members. And these are the bravest staff members on the face of the planet. All right there. Because I don't even see that they have a harness on. So I'm not quite sure that that would fit your safety and security plan, but all right, they are the upfront view. There is a balance to all of this. And Joe mentioned the fact that sometimes you would navigate kind of out of that governance view into the administrative and into the operational. It is not that does not happen because of sometimes always just a lack of trust. Sometimes it happens because of that sense of urgency and your expertise. But you need all three levels. And you have to be able to have and give that direction to Sean of this is the what. He then provides the how. And your teachers are an extremely important part of that leadership piece, because they are the boots on the ground and they're the ones who make it happen. So if you want different lessons, you know, going on in your classrooms, it is your teachers who have to take that leadership. If you want a different kind of curriculum kind of focus, it belongs to the teachers. It belongs to all. And we do this kind of juxtaposition back and forth about the fact that you use your governing documents and then Sean uses his plans and the procedures. So you have provided with your vote this resolution. And I've not seen it, so I don't know the specifics within it. But whatever is there, he then now is accountable for creating that particular plan and the procedures to support them. You focus on what and the ends. And the what and the ends in the discussion that you had previously is really about the whole fact that you want all children to have equitable opportunities. You want them to be able to have the resources that they need in order to be successful. You want to be able to eradicate any kind of systems that you have that are keeping kids back. You give that directive, but he determines the how. He takes direction from you, but staff take direction from him. And this is supported in your school board policies, obviously. One of the quizzes that we usually give, or I give to kind of seasoned board members, is that I ask them to name what are your 6 governing documents. And there's something that unites all of these. So your 6, because I don't have time to give you the quiz, or I would, Your six documents are policy, your strategic plan. Okay, we've heard those tonight. Your superintendent evaluation. Again, we've heard that one. Your agenda is one. The other will be any other district plans that come out of, that could be derived from your strategic plan. It can be safety and security, it can be long-range facilities, those kinds of things, and then your budget. But here is my question, and this is not rhetorical, you have to answer. And that is, what makes these in common? What do they have in common?
The board creates all of them? Like the board is the one that creates all those documents, these different entities?
Well, they don't, if they
Well,
may
not
not be
create,
creating them, but they have to, you're almost there. They have to
We
do
have to
what with
approve.
them? Approve them.
Approve of something, yeah.
Thank you. All right. And so my point is that if you approve them, then here's your responsibility. A, you have to know where they live. You have to know where they are. If this is your governing tool. B, you have to know what they say. Now, this does not mean you have to sit down on a Friday night with a beverage and read every policy in your policy book. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. But you need to know how to access them. You need to know what they say. And then the other one, and this is crucial, is that you actually have to use them. And you would be surprised at people who look at me and go, well, duh. And I'm going to tell you that it isn't always the case about using them. So those are your three kind of caveats for those as well. So let's talk about policy for just a minute. You know, and Jason brought up about having, you know, an equity policy and being able to make sure that your policies are demonstrating your beliefs and your resolution about equity. Policies are absolutely critical. They are your best friend because what they do is they outline, quote unquote, the rules, and they have that level of accountability built in them. It communicates to the public and it says, public, here's how we operate as a district. And that's what's outlined in your policy. To the board, it gives you direction regarding operations and decisions. And for your administration and actually for your teachers, it directs them as far as their guidelines, the procedures, and the plans. So because policy is so critical and important, there are really, when you are faced with tough issues, there are three kind of critical questions that you should use. And number one that you ask is, do we have a policy about this topic? And if we do, what does the policy say? How does it give us guidance? And so if it is a decision we have to make, then you ask, then how can this policy guide our discussion and our decision? If it is something that you're reviewing after the fact, you know, if there's been an incident or something like that, you ask these same questions, but you ask, did we follow it? Did we do what we said that we would do? So because policy is so important, and there are 978,000 of them, okay, well, not maybe that many, but close. There are three that are foundational for effective governance. And so for new board members, what I'm highly suggesting to you to do is to sit down with your policies and read the B's, as I call them. It's all the policies that are about your operations as a board. And there are two in there that are absolutely foundational and critical. And that is policy BBA, which outlines what are your powers and duties, and policy BBF about ethics. And we're going to delve into both of those in just a minute. And Kim, you are the poster child for policy KL. I'm just going to say you nailed it. All right. And so congratulations, because you almost read it verbatim, you know, with how you shared that with us. But you're exactly right on taking care of stakeholder concerns. You lost your anonymity when you became a board member, correct? You know, I know that, you know, we're not heading out to Target and, you know, as many places as we used to, but think about my more seasoned board members. Think about how often you've been cornered in Target, the grocery store. You've probably gotten lots of phone calls, those kinds of things with lots of issues. And I collect stories. I'll just share with you of some of the strangest places where board members have been cornered about certain issues that are arising in the district. And I'll share some of those with you in just a minute. Okay, so let's talk about those three. Policy BBA is there for you, but it is also there for your stakeholders. And they'll say, you know, I elected you to the board, I contributed to your campaign, I distributed flyers, I did all of those kinds of things. But, you know, that doesn't mean that you are just the representative for their particular issues. You have legislative, executive, appraisal, financial, staffing, educational planning, and evaluation, and judicial. And so one of the things that I'm going to kind of challenge you on is I'm going to challenge you, take policy BBA, think about your resolution that you've just passed and adopted about anti-racism, anti-bias, okay? And think about how can these particular responsibilities of ours as a board, how do we incorporate what we've just passed as being our commitment and our resolution? That's going to take some thinking on your part and some discussion on your part, but that's my challenge to you, all right? Just to think about that piece. Do I say anything to me at this point? I'm sorry. I'm talk fast sometimes.
No, this is really good though.
Okay, all right, okay. And Jason, by the way, I'm going home with your artwork that is behind you. Just thought I would share. Okay.
You can have that, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So your policy BBF, you know, your policies are housed online. You can access it, but what is important in that particular policy is that there are 16 attributes that talk about your ethics. Normally, if we have more time, I talk about your role as a fiduciary because you were elected to be a fiduciary to all of the children, meaning you are their voice. And Sean is also a fiduciary, but he is a fiduciary not because he was elected, but because he was hired by you. And as a fiduciary, you know that you have that duty of loyalty, duty of care, and duty of public trust, all of those that are critical and important. Your policy BBF tries to address all of those caveats of being a fiduciary. So there are 16 of them. We're not going to go through all of them, but there are 3 different areas that really tend to be probably the ones that are more challenging, shall we say. And that is the first one that we're going to talk about is it's listed in your policy as number 5 about delegating your authority to your superintendent. The other one is about being able to speak with one voice. And then the third one is talking about kind of personal agendas or personal viewpoints. So we're going to talk about each one of these in turn, and I've got some little stories to go with it as well. And there might be some cartoons that I threw in there. So number 5 is about delegating to the superintendent. Your discussion is important, and all of the things that you shared that were important to you in talking about your resolution and your commitment are really absolutely critical and important. You were talking about the hiring, you know, and I know what you're talking about there is about, you know, the diversity of your staff. Holding the staff accountable for the resolution and the belief systems behind anti-racism and anti-bias. And those particular pieces, though, that you talked about really belong to Sean. That is his responsibility, and you have a tool to hold him accountable for it, and we're going to talk about that. it's important to share with him what's critical to you, what's important to you, but figuring out the how, that's his responsibility to do. And so we'll talk about delegation here for just a minute. I have more to this story than what I'm sharing with you here. Again, an absolutely true story. This was not your district, however, but I wanted to find this board member and kind of pinch his ear. I'll just be truthful. All right. So we have board member Andy, and he drops in on the superintendent to inform him about a complaint from his neighbor about a dangerous situation with the bus driver. And so the superintendent says, great, thank you. You know, I'm going to call the transportation director and we're going to iron this out. Well, Andy shares that he's already investigated the issue by following the bus driver for the last 3 days. And in actuality, what Andy did is that he drove 3 different cars on those 3 different days. He borrowed a car from his daughter. He did anyway. It was interesting. So according to Andy, he came up with all of the infractions like driving too fast, not waiting for a kid, and stopping abruptly or whatever. And Andy explains that he's already put in the call to the transportation director, but that the superintendent should follow up. So and of course, this isn't what Andy was supposed to do, but what the question I want to ask you about is, what are the unintended consequences of his actions? It came from a good place. It came from his heart. You know, he's worried about the kids. This needs to be taken care of. But what's the unintended consequences because we've lost that balance of leadership? That's not a rhetorical question. I have to ask you, what do you think are the consequences for that?
Well, a major problem with it is it undermines your superintendent from his
Yeah.
managerial perspective.
Right.
And so who's the transportation director is going, but it's a board member, okay? And you sign or you approve his contract, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, but you're not his boss. And so that's that's a really fine line that you have to navigate as well. So the transportation director is also confused because who does he report to? Does he have to call the board member, you know, if there are issues? Does he just call his superintendent, that kind of thing? And I know that one of the things that you were working on with the governance core was creating a system of protocols. So my seasoned board members, I'm looking at your faces. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Yeah, sort of.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And so I know that you're extremely busy. I get it. But out of that book, that I thought was one of the best suggestions that they gave to you about how to really implement this. We write up a protocol about communication and about how, you know, making sure that it goes along the chain of command as well. I watched an issue like this backfire in a district on the other side of the state where the board members, and it was just innocuous, would call up and ask, you know, the assistant superintendent some questions or whatever. But what happened then is that when the superintendent found out that those questions were being directed to the assistant sup, the superintendent felt, you know, like, oh my gosh, is there something wrong with me because they're navigating around to the assistant sup. So it wasn't intended that way, but it's the way that it happened. So circumventing the balanced leadership occurs for lots of reasons. One of the first ones is that you don't have that focus on your priorities. Sometimes it is a lack of trust. Sometimes it is just personal ego, to be truthful, or I think I've got this expertise in certain things. But David hit right on the nose about the consequences for it is that it undermines your superintendent and it puts your preferences before the district preferences and sends that no confidence message. And there are some strategies for it, but one of the two that I'm going to focus on are those bottom two. about your superintendent evaluation and asking good governance level types of questions. Board members are sometimes accused of getting into, called getting into the weeds, getting into the minutia and those kinds of things. And so one of the things that we've done is to help to develop, and I will send this to you tomorrow as well, but just some good core governing types of questions to ask. So if in fact materials are being brought to you for, approval, you would ask, what was the process for selecting the materials, for hiring this individual, for whatever, but you ask, what was that process? Because there better be one. The other is that you want to know who's involved in the process. Was this just somebody who was sitting in an office who made this decision? How was collaboration brought into it? How are our stakeholder voices brought into it? And then how do we know that this is the best? And that means that there's some evidence, there's some data behind it, there's some measures, which is that next question about what's the data that was used to determine. And Jason, I really liked your question too, that you had brought up about, what are those measures that we're going to use for this resolution piece? And I think Sean gave you some really good answers on that. But there are pieces you do, what gets monitored or measured is what's monitored and gets accomplished. And so those are really some good core questions, obviously, to ask. I didn't really talk about the superintendent evaluation. If we had more time together, I would talk about that. I suggest to you of sitting down and looking at what are the goals that you have for Sean for this year, looking for the alignment of those goals to your resolution, to your equity initiative, and clearly defining what are the measures that you're going to ask of him. However, within this next year, you have to be realistic about what it is that he can accomplish and what he can get going because of, the who knows what's going to happen tomorrow kind of thing. But that's one of your governing documents. That's where equity also needs to be a key factor. And it is obviously something that you can use for accountability. You will not always agree with each other. Is that a surprise?
No,
Okay.
it's not.
No, it is not. But you know what? If you all agreed with each other all the time, how boring you would be. And so we don't want you to be boring. Okay. All right. It's important that this is part of your board ethics policy of expressing your personal opinions. But once the board is acted, you have to accept the will of the majority. This is probably, I think, the hardest piece of board service. Well, one of the hardest pieces of it. And so here's again, a true scenario that happened. And this is where at a board meeting, they decided to vote, and it was a split vote, 4-3, to privatize the district transportation department. They had it in-house before. They were gonna, privatize it out. You were not on the prevailing side. You thought it would, ultimately be less convenient, less safe, all of those kinds of things for the kids. But two people approach you after the board meeting, and one of them is your neighbor and one of them is a classroom teacher. And they want to know, how do you feel about the board's decision? And remember, you think it's wrong-headed, and it was horrible. And you also feel that you need to have the integrity to say so. So how do you approach this as a board member? What do you do?
You could say, well, whether I disagree or not, this is the direction that we're moving, and I'm
Yep.
going to support it.
Yep, you can, even if you sort of don't mean it. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
You have to support the board's decision.
But that's harder said than done.
Right.
You know, all right. And so I just want you to understand that there are really two ways as a board member that you ensure that your voice is heard. And that is through board discussion and through your individual vote. You know, there used to be this caveat of thinking that, boy, it had to be a 7-0 vote, or that, you know, it shows that there's problem on the board, and that is not true. And so you have to vote according to the knowledge that you have, the data you've been provided, those kinds of things. And just know that board discussion is absolutely critical and important. I watched a board meeting where it was a really horrible decision that they were having to make. It was going to involve, you know, kind of the layoff of some people. I know that there had been some discussion going on behind the scenes. It was pretty contentious when they got to the board meeting and the item was brought up on the agenda. There was no discussion. They just voted. And I'm going, okay, well, that tells us that the discussion happened behind the scenes. And so I know that sometimes, you know, discussions can go long, but it's really important that you share your voice. And that's where you have to have a strong president and somebody who is savvy and understands how to make sure that every board member has the opportunity to express his or her views and honors people's views. So no pressure, Joe, at all on you, okay? But that's where it's important to look at. There are some strategies, some things that you can do. And again, my cursor is giving me some problems. There we go. Okay. Exactly. You know, Stacy, it was like I needed to pay you $64 million because you got the right answer. All right. And that is, you support the process, and there are legal and practical reasons that it exists. This particular process of, you know, going with the majority of the vote. And you can, though, support the decision and say things just like what Jason talked about. And we try to give you some language to be able to say it, you know, like, my position is well known, but I'm confident of our decision-making process. My vote speaks for itself, but I accept the will of the board. And sometimes you have to swallow it back. But if in fact you are really right, and this was a wrong-headed decision, it will make itself known eventually. But for the meantime, you have to accept the process. The other is that, you know, if any board member says they don't have a personal agenda, they are not telling the truth. Every board member has certain issues that are of concern, especially to them. And so one of the things that, you know, a lot of times when people will run for the board, you will be asked questions like, okay, what is your thought about this particular issue within the district? What is your thought on this one? And that's great, but you have to render all of your decisions based on the facts and your independent judgment and not the influence of other people. The governance core talks about this. That book does, about the importance. This is that kind of balance between governance and politics as well. And so sometimes this is one that is difficult for board members. Again, a true story. There was a school that they were working on closing. And this lady had run for the school board. She was part of the parent committee about keeping it open and not closing it. There were so many people who wanted to keep it open that they were pretty much her voters. And so that's what kind of got her on the board. But once she got on the board, she started to find out some information about some of the economic and curricular reasons for why the school really needed to be closed. And so she was put in a position of where she knew what the vote needed to be, but she was going to alienate these particular people in the community. And so that's why I'm going to tell you is that, you know, we have some politicians who claim, you know, who complain about the fact nobody likes me, you know, and guess what? There will be times community members aren't going to like you. And I don't want to say kind of tough, but in a way, tough. You know, you ran, you asked for this position, and you're here to serve, and you are going to make some people angry. You just are. It's a fact of life. So there are some strategies to reduce those personal agendas. One of them is about making sure that at the local level, you've got really good training to help support them. The other is about really training your stakeholders about what the role is of the board, making sure that you are united around what are the priorities of the district, and including stakeholder input, having those frequent discussions about your key performance measures, you know, and Joe referred to having like the scorecard kind of thing, but understanding and knowing what those measures are, making sure that you've got data connected to program evaluation. The Park Hill School District has revamped their program evaluation process, and they now have equity and some equity kinds of questions and data that has to be collected on every program evaluation that they do. So again, it speaks to the whole ideology that this can be permeated all the way up, not just you know, one action. And then always, of course, listening to your stakeholders. And so Kim, who knows policy KL, all right, just know that when you are accosted in Target and Walmart or those kinds of places, that you have a policy to help you navigate when you have stakeholders who come to you with issues. And they're going to come to you first before they'll go to Sean, because you're there, you're in the community, they voted for you. And I promised I would share very quickly a couple of really interesting stories of where people have been accosted by their stakeholders. One of them was, I had a friend she was at church and she was just listening to the sermon, and there was a rustling in the pew, and she looked down and somebody was passing a church bulletin to her, and she's like, I got a church bulletin, I don't, you know, whatever. Well, this one was special because somebody at the other end saw her and wrote out the complaint in the margins, because that's the only free space of the church bulletin, and passed it down to her. My other favorite one, and so you'll pardon me, this is a little, I don't mean to be crass, but this one I thought this one got me. And this was a guy who was a parent. He was at a basketball game. He needed to go to the bathroom. He went in to use the restroom. A parent followed him into the bathroom, stood at the urinal next to him to unload about the basketball coach and to tell him about how the basketball coach wasn't playing his kid, he didn't like him, those kinds of things. And I asked the board member, I said, so how were you about being able to listen to this person's, you know, complaint? And he's like, you couldn't. But just know that there is this process, and it is there to support you. And again, a lot of it comes back to the legal piece of it, because if it would involve a hearing, you can't be involved in the pieces prior. You have to be able to have that anonymity as well. So here's why you practice ethical leadership. And I know I took it from the University of Kansas. For anybody who's a Mizzou grad, I apologize, but it was good stuff, the things that they had as well. And that is my Reader's Digest condensed version of effective board governance based upon research. I think I did it in less than an hour.
You did, Janet. That was really awesome. So any questions or thoughts for Janet from the board?
Okay, you've had a long night, I get it, and so please know that what I'm going to do is that I'm going to follow up with the resources that I promised you that are around kind of that the board's role in supporting equity and anti-racism and so forth, so that you've got it to look at. And then if you have any questions for us as you're navigating this work, I'm going to tell you, we don't have all the answers. We're not going to pretend that we do, but we're ready to start the journey. And we know that there's some things that have to change within our organization and in the supports that we give to school districts. And we want to do that work. And please know that I'm going to have you on speed dial, okay, because I'm calling you to be able to help with that work. All right.
Janet, what was the name of the school district you said that has the program evaluation tool? I couldn't hear you.
It is Park Hill.
Okay. Okay.
Dr. Jeanette Coward.
Yeah.
And Jeanette that woman shares everything. So
Yeah.
she's very good about doing that. But the pieces that I'm going to send to you from Pennsylvania, I'm going to ask you to look at that first, because they talk about the fact that you don't even go to having an equity policy until you've done all of these other pieces before. And so I think that's going to help you some. And I can send you, besides what's on their website, I can send you some additional kinds of documents and supports that they have. I'll be truthful, I'm stealing a lot from them. That's what a good teacher does, is you watch somebody who's a good teacher and you steal from them, and that's what I'm doing. Okay, and just know we'll keep you updated on some of the things that we're doing in this process as well.
And we had talked about for the board that we are thinking about how do we keep this learning ongoing. And so there's other aspects of tonight's presentation that we didn't get to. And so we're looking at having Janet come back again at some point during the year.
I hope you ask me back. So,
We
I'll
really
be there
appreciate
for
it.
you. Okay.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Janet.
You are so welcome. And please stay healthy and stay safe and stay strong. All right.
Thanks a lot, Janet. Appreciate it.
You too. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye.
Yeah, thanks. And so, board, we still need to adjourn. So is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that the Board of Education adjourn.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes. We are adjourned. Thank you all. I know it was a long night, but I appreciate it. Thanks. Good
Thank
discussion.
you.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Yeah.